we're seeing the impacts on female health. Women's bodies just simply are more impacted by long-term or
Hmm.
heavier alcohol use than men's. You just see it in the way it is connected to cancer, specifically breast cancer, and more research is coming out on that. So it's affecting us very personally and in our parenting, as it does men, but also it's affecting our health and our long-term sort of stability and the way that we make decisions. And the other thing I would say is, yeah, you can drink a glass of wine a week and maybe it's not a problem and like that's your thing. But so many people, recognize that it's not one glass a week and they don't want to stop with one. And they are maybe they are more irritable. They are less discerning when they're drinking. They're more argumentative with their spouse. They have a shorter patience level for their children. And it's just not developing or forming good character in us and who we want to be as Christians and as Christ followers.
Well, hey there, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Faith Roundtable. I am your host, Josh Burtram, and of course, I'm the faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. Happens here on the same channel, so make sure you like and subscribe because this world is going crazy. Again, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's going nuts, and we're trying to be a place where people can have some sanity and talk about things without screaming at each other. So make sure you like, subscribe, do the things that hack the algorithm. Also, we have a Patreon. Make sure you're checking that out as well. And of course, this is the Faith Roundtable. And here on the Faith Roundtable, we talk to all sorts of leaders and authors and thought leaders and scholars to talk about what's going on in Christianity in America. And I'm super excited today to talk with Ericka Andersen. She's a journalist, author, and speaker whose work focuses on faith, culture, women, and the church. She's written for outlets including Christianity Today, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and World Magazine. She's the author of several books, including Reason to Return and Leaving Cloud Nine, and her latest book, Freely Sober, which is published by University Press. She lives in Indianapolis with her family, and we're here to talk about her latest book, Freely Sober. Thank you so much, Ericka, for jumping on the program, spending some time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love it. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So I got to ask, why this book? Why now? Why do we care about being sober these days? It's so crazy out there. Isn't now the time to drink more than any other time? No, I'm just kidding. But why? Why now? Why now? What's going on?
Well,
Why the book?
it's funny because people were saying that back in 2020. I don't know if you
Oh, yes,
remember,
that's
there was
true.
a lot of joking about day drinking back in 2020
Quite a
among
bit.
every demographic, including Christians. Actually, you might say that this book kind of spun out of the pandemic because what we did see at that time was rates of drinking rising among every demographic in the country
Yes.
to sky high numbers. And one of the highest numbers you saw, like by far, was mothers of young children under the age of 5. Their drinking increased by about 360%, which is totally
Wait.
insane. Yeah, it's totally insane.
I mean, when you have young kids, it does make you want to drink. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
but that's crazy. Okay. So you notice that, then what happened?
Yeah. And oddly enough, I was actually part of that demographic. My kids at the time were 2 and 4. So it was like all of a sudden, you're trapped in your house and none of the parks are open and there's literally nowhere to go and you feel a little crazy. And because we were given sort of a hall pass for drinking, I mean, I've never seen so many memes than I did at that time.
Yeah.
A lot of people ran into troublesome drinking issues at that time. And I had already had my own past full of some troublesome drinking. Basically, for the past 20 years, I had had this really unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And as a person of faith, it was
Sure.
already conflicting. But things sort of ratcheted up at that time. And ultimately, by the end of the summer of 2020, I had quit drinking. And as a writer, as I do, I just kind of put my story out there online, began writing about it, was able to write a big essay for the New York Times, which really kind of kicked off me recognizing what an important topic this is. many women are struggling that there was such an interest in conversation around this topic. People are always like wanting to weigh in and, talk about their own
Hmm.
experience. And so, I just kind of moved in that direction. I felt like God was opening doors, giving me ideas, things were happening. And that's kind of how it's happened with all of my books. And it just kind of it worked out. And I really think this is a message that people need to hear and people want to talk about and is sort of a little bit of a heart and a spiritual issue for a lot of women and men in this country.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I really appreciate you taking the time to write the book and to put this out there for us to get conversations around these things. It's funny because probably like 50 years ago, or even maybe even less, like there's no way like even an IVP or maybe IVP, but like you're not going to see a lot of books about like, being okay with drinking alcohol or having some kind of freedom. And that's
Yeah.
one of the points you kind of bring up. Like, of course, like the drinking went up, but the church itself, right, has changed in terms of its cultural acceptance of drinking within America. There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
Obviously, there are some denominations and some sectors of the church that still don't. And I was in the Assemblies of God. I resigned my credentials, but I was in the Assemblies of God, which they don't allow their ministers to drink. And there are a couple other denominations like that. And so we see this shift. And it makes me think about a lot of things. One, I really appreciate your story because I share a very similar story in the sense that I definitely drank too much. I started drinking at 21. I kind of hid it because, again, I was a minister and I didn't want people to know, but I knew a lot of ministers that drank. And I stopped drinking because I did it too much. It became a controlling thing in my life. And my wife, we came to a head at a point where like, I had to stop, and so it's been over 4 years since I think it was 2021 since I've had
Yeah.
anything to drink.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, but it wasn't because I wanted to stop drinking. It was
Right.
because it kind of like, and to some of the points you bring up, like it had become this thing that was controlling, and this thing then it wasn't just controlling, it was unhealthy, and it was doing a lot of it was doing a lot of damage in my family. And it's hard because I'm definitely not a saint. I definitely still have my issues, addictions, issues going on in my life. And we all try to work through this stuff. Like, it was there. How do you feel like the church does with talking about this issue of alcohol?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's like you're right. We kind of have gone through a metamorphosis as the church. It's like back in Bible times, of course, everyone drank wine. Wine is in the
Basically,
Bible. We know that. One thing I kind of learned in the course of my research is that alcohol of yesteryear, of many yesteryears, is not necessarily the exact same as it is today. So a lot
hmm,
of wine in biblical times may have been diluted. It may not have had, quite as high as of alcohol content as a lot of the alcohol that we see consumed today. That's not
hmm,
to say there wasn't any. Clearly, there was drunkenness back then. We were warned about it 70 times, depending on the version of the Bible that you read. We are warned not to partake in drunkenness. So it was there, but as common as it seemed reading the Bible, it was really more of just like a daily thing and less so much of a thing we're using to celebrate or to, go out and do fun events. It was just kind of a more normal part of everyday life, whereas people generally are overusing it probably more than they did then. But let me go back for a second and say, yes, you're right. Like I must have been I know it's in the book and I'm just off the top of my head, I'm not remembering, but maybe it was the early 900s or so, late 1800s, when the church started to like really reject alcohol and get very legalistic about using it. And it was for good reason. It was because
yeah,
like it was destroying families. Like most of it
yes,
was men, that was the sort of what you saw back then, men using it in ways that were kind of destroying their families. And so that's why you
hmm,
saw women like start the temperance movement and all of this stuff happened just as they were trying to get through it. And so there was this very long period of time where a lot of the church was very legalistic and you can't drink. And then at some point along the way, maybe it was maybe 60s, 70s, we began to take away a lot of that legalism and the denominations, some of them kind of took away the rules. And even the ones that did have rules against it, it was kind of like, it's one of those kind of, we're not really abiding by that type of thing. Then of course, when you're in a denomination like if you're Catholic or you're Episcopalian, I mean, those kind of churches actually have wine at their actual church events.
Right.
And so it's kind of across the spectrum. And nowadays it's sort of like, well, you don't want to be a legalist. That's kind of boring. That's kind of not cool anymore. And so, through that whole period of time, the church is it's kind of like not talked about. We're not really talking about it. And so I think the church didn't realize there was this major uptick in drinking issues,
Hmm.
especially among women. I don't think they realized that that was happening.
No.
But the numbers are coming out, and we're seeing it not only in the numbers of people that are abusing alcohol, but also just the way it is affecting our health and wellness and just families in general. And so I think the awareness is starting to tick up now. And one of my missions in this whole process is to make churches understand that they need to open the door to this topic, not meaning like, oh, you have to preach a sermon on it, but just like recognizing that there are a percentage of their church family that probably deal with this in some way, shape, or form. And there should be an opportunity for those people to talk about it and to get help without shame and without feeling like they have to be perfect in order to step forward.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. You have in your work the theme, right, of writing on women and faith. And the I'm so intrigued by this idea that we just didn't see it. We didn't see it happening and we didn't see it coming, especially among women and young mothers. This 300% or 350% rise that you referenced. I want to zero in on that a little bit, dig down on the issue that this is affecting young mothers, and obviously the stress of life is there, but what did you find out about how this is affecting women, and why did you feel like this made alcohol the kind of next unavoidable topic for
Yeah.
you that you had to address?
Well, just, in myself, there was so many pieces that came together in deciding that I needed to quit. And it was, over the course of many years that I finally got here. I mean, I think getting older, just like recognizing your own mortality and realizing
Yes.
that like I'm not going to be young forever. And I had this thought one day of like, do you want to be praying about this, dealing with this, still struggling with this topic when you're 75 years old? And that was a very powerful thought to me. And I was like, I don't, but how am I going to prevent that from happening if I don't get it together now in my age? So that was one side of it. And then you asked how it kind of snuck up on us, right? That was your question. Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just wanted to dig more in on what you have discovered and your insights on why women were doing this and why you felt like this had to be addressed, like
Right.
in particular for women as a
Right.
primary audience.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, number one, we're just like, you just see the numbers and you're like, oh, that's concerning. That is concerning that that many people are drinking that much. And we know, especially as people of faith, like we're thinking like, that's affecting your parenting. Whether you believe it or not, like your kids are very attuned to any mood changes. We don't give kids enough credit and they recognize any little bit of your personality or the way that you respond to them that is off. And that makes them feel unsafe. So I think there's the aspect of thinking of kids first and what's the example you're setting and how present are you as a parent in that situation. But also, we're seeing the impacts on female health. Women's bodies just simply are more impacted by long term or
Hmm.
heavier alcohol use than men's. You just see it in the way it is connected to cancer, specifically breast cancer. And more research is coming out on that. So it's affecting us very personally and in our parenting, as it does men, but also it's affecting our health and our long term sort of stability and, the way that we make decisions. And the other thing I would say is, yeah, you can drink a glass of wine a week and maybe it's not a problem and like that's your thing. But so many people, recognize that it's not one glass a week and they don't want to stop with one. And they are maybe they are more irritable. They are less discerning when they're drinking. They're more argumentative with their spouse. They have a shorter patience level for their children. And it's just not developing or forming good character in us and who we want to be as Christians and as Christ followers.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens with alcohol is the cultural attachments, the nostalgia, not
Hmm.
just that, the identity that might come with it, the social glue that it almost is, right? It's almost a social lubricant and then even a glue at the same time, like bringing people together, and also, how you know creating this sense of that people are just a little bit more loose or whatever. The reasons why people drink, right? I mean, there's a reason that people drink. If it made you feel awful in the moment. I realize that hangovers are
Yeah,
real.
yeah,
I
sometimes
very
later.
much understand that. But, in that moment, you wouldn't do it if it wasn't bringing something in you that you felt good about. And so, and when I've looked at this, you get to this, like I attended some AA meetings, and when you go to AA, which I think AA is a great program. There is this sense though that it's like, hey, it's black and white and it's one or the other, you know. It's like you're stopping and that's it. There is no other choice. Like this is what's going on. And yet it seems like that might be like I do know people like that they can have beer in their refrigerator for literally 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, not drink it.
Throw it out by then.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, "Oh, wait, this beer's expired." I
Yes.
mean, the idea of an expired beer to me was an oxymoron. That
Yeah.
made no sense. There's no way that was happening. So it's like you have certain people that they can drink, it's no big deal. It's not even a problem. Then you have some people, they'll drink and maybe they'll use a lot and then they'll stop and they'll stop for months and then they'll start again or maybe they'll drink a little bit and then right and it's like at what point like they don't do it every night. They don't want to do it every night. They do it on the weekends or whatever. And so there's some level of control. What I'm saying and what you get at, I think even within the book, is this that we live in this gray area
Mhm.
where this like we're not addicted. Obviously there are people that are addicted, but also not free.
Right.
Right. That many people and many women are in this. I'm not addicted, but I'm also not free.
Yeah,
So what is that? What's going on there? How do you
yeah.
define that gray area?
Yeah, I mean, even I, when using the word addiction, kind of bristle at that because, I personally don't use the term alcoholic for myself. Labels and words surrounding this problem can be like really triggering or really hard for people. And so, someone that is thinking about this and maybe
Absolutely,
feeling
it can't.
like they have an issue with it, and well, I'm not addicted, or I'm not an alcoholic, and so it's like, I think the labels can stop people from kind of exploring this a little bit. I think a term that really resonated with me is self medicating. I use it as self medication. If I
No
had a
doubt.
headache, I have a Tylenol. If I have anxiety, I have wine. And so I was really using it in that way. And I wasn't, per se physically addicted in that if I saw, because if you are truly physically addicted and you stop drinking cold turkey, you can actually die.
Yes.
And so I wasn't to that point, right? But does that mean I was or wasn't an alcoholic? Nobody knows. These terms are very subjective. But the reality is, if you are uncomfortable with the way alcohol is a part of your life, if you feel conviction from the Holy Spirit, if you are thinking about it, if you're even thinking about it, it's on your mind, you're like, maybe I shouldn't drink so much, or maybe I should take a break. Like, you should explore that. Like, what is that? There's
Yeah.
something there and there's a reason for it. And I think people forget that alcohol is a drug. It's a legal drug, but it is a drug. It changes your mindset. It makes you less discerning. It is not empowering to you as a person and as a woman because you are less aware. And that's not a good thing. It's actually unsafe, especially for young women that are out at like parties or whatever. Like it's very
Right.
unsafe. And
Right.
so I think it's like, let's throw out all the stereotypes and the labels and just be like, this is the thing that's me right now. And I want to get to the bottom of this and I want to explore it without the pressure. That's why it's called freely
Yes.
sober, without the pressure of saying, I am an alcoholic or I have to quit drinking. But like, if it's been on your mind for a while, why are you not exploring it? and and assessing what the role of alcohol is in your life and going back. I mean, it's really just like being a reporter of your own life. Like, let's go back to the beginning and be like, when did you first start thinking about alcohol? How was it talked about in your home as a child? How have you used it? What are the myths or assumptions that you have about how it is a part of your life, including some of those nostalgic moments? But it doesn't hurt to just kind of take inventory without expectation and just be looking at it all as data. This is data. What does the data tell me about alcohol and me? And when I see that data, what decisions do I want to make as a result of it?
Yeah. There's so many. There's so many questions that are coming up in my mind, and I really appreciate the approach that you're taking. It's an approach that I like and I really resonate with. If I could just kind of like maybe think out loud for a minute, because when when I was working through, my issues with alcohol, we'll call it just alcohol problem, whatever, right? It was affecting my life. It was affecting my family's life and came to a head. And me and my wife, she had a very, come to Jesus moment. And we basically were like, okay, I got to get help. So I did, and I went and I did it was like a in-house, not in, it was an outpatient, just like program, where you just went every night and you just talked and you thought about this and you worked through the alcohol issue. And a couple of things came to my mind. One thing, like the church was not a place that I felt any kind of safety to talk about this issue. Especially as a pastor, there was zero feeling that I could talk to anybody about what's going on here, especially during the time when I had credentials. And it was even more difficult. Like there was just no sense, like the incentive structure essentially, in my opinion, incentivized dishonesty and hiding. So I felt like needed to change. There's got to be a way we can change that. Also, like just thinking about the wording issue that you're talking about, because it's like, is it kind of like the thing? Because I hear you, like when I say I'm addicted or I'm an addict. Like on one hand, that brings an enormous amount of shame. So it's almost like there's like this push for people in these programs to admit that they're an alcoholic, right? You need to say it. A lot
Mhm.
of times more now, they're not pushing it as much. They're like, that's up to you. But, there's more. But the overall gist is this is a problem. You've got to face reality. You've got to say it. And there's a lot of positive stuff about that. And yet I do feel like there was a double-edged sword to it where there's an enormous amount of shame. You felt like you had to get to a place where you said this so that the program was quote unquote effective. And then, so you felt a lot of pressure, not necessarily to come from a place that I have changed, but to come from a place where, oh, I have done the adequate work to get whoever X, so-and-so, whatever it is off my back. And that's not everything that I was feeling. That's not what I mean by that. But you have these like, and I certainly appreciated it. And it was a really overall great experience actually for me. And I'm very thankful I did it. And I'm thankful that my wife and she really encouraged me to do it. I'm just thankful for that. So all of that is true. And there was this sense that I had to say the right words, say the thing, admit, say it. And I was always like struggling and wrestling with that. And it almost is like once you say you're an addict, like that's supposed to be in some way freeing, but it actually kind of doesn't. To me, the experience wasn't freedom to me.
Mhm.
The experience was, it was actually very much a trap, very much a
Right.
prison. You're an
Right.
addict.
Yeah,
This
and it's
is your
also
identity in prison.
right, it's also like, as Christians, we don't wanna identify by that, and I understand there are definitely differing opinions on that, especially within the world of AA, but, like, we are, who we are in Christ first and foremost, and if you don't feel comfortable calling yourself an addict or an alcoholic, I totally understand that, and I don't think anyone should be forced to label themselves in such a way, and so I am thankful that there are programs that I mean, again, I never wanna put down AA, it has saved so many lives. I didn't go through AA, I went through
Absolutely.
another program, and there are a lot more options out there these days, and I think thankfully because
Absolutely.
people are all different, and I think that met a need. Just like basically me writing this book meets a need because there isn't a lot of faith-based resources out there, which is why I decided to write the book. But yeah, I think the labeling thing really puts people off. And then it's like, it's really from both sides because it's interesting. I have some family and people I know that have dealt with those in their life who really like hardcore rock bottom style addiction, like homeless, meant a lot of mental illness, all this stuff. And so when I talk about addiction, I have people going, you are fine. I had that. People telling me when I said I think I might have
Both.
to,
Yeah.
people would tell me, "You're fine, you're normal, you're going to work, you're working
Yeah.
out, you're
You
being."
get like at the home or like friends, they're like, oh, you're addicted. You have a problem. Then you actually go to this program and you have people literally looking at me and saying, why are you here? What are you doing here?
Right, and so you have it from
And
both sides
yeah, anyway, sorry.
'cause there's
That literally happened. I'm not saying they were correct. I'm saying I literally had people say that to me because of how much worse they
right,
were.
right,
And they're,
exactly, and
yeah,
it's like, if you have a problem, you have a problem. Nobody else gets to define that. If it's a problem for you, then it's a problem, like, it's like we don't have to It's like you're not supposed to compare trauma. Same thing here. Like if it's an issue, it's an
Yeah.
issue for you, and like you can deal with that. You can take the steps to walk through it no matter how bad it gets. We don't want to reach a real rock bottom if we don't have to. Rock bottom is wherever you decide to stop digging, they say.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I actually like that. I've never heard that phrase before. That's why I said, rock bottom is wherever you decide to
It's
stop
true.
digging. And that is true. So I think that's going to preach. I like that one a lot. What, if someone's listening to this, I'm sure they're going to think all sorts of things. One, they might think about themselves first, and then they'll think about people that they know. Right? The people closest to them, well, they should listen to this because they have a problem and I want them to recognize that. I'm going to send this over to them. I'm not saying this is all about being manipulative or something. I'm just saying, like, people start thinking about this. Is this me? Is this the person I know? Should I send this? Should I do? What are some of the signs? What would you say to that person maybe? And what are some of the signs that, yeah, we might be moving into gray area, even into dependency on alcohol? Essentially, how might they even start to diagnose this
Yeah.
issue?
I mean, I think one sign could be, of course, this is all subjective and everybody's different, but like if you start giving yourself rules, like, okay, I'm only going to have this many glasses of wine, or I'm not going to drink, Monday through Friday, when you start having to set up rules for yourself, like that's a red flag, I think. Or if you set up a rule and then you break that rule, that's even more of a red flag. Something I did all the time, towards the end of
Heck yeah.
drinking, where I would say to myself, okay, I am not drinking tomorrow. And then I have a really like distinct memory of one particular night where I had said I wasn't going to drink that day. 5, 6 o'clock hit. I end up drinking. I fall asleep. At midnight, I wake up and I'm, thirsty. I have a headache. And I'm like, I started getting a very panicky feeling because I was like, I said I
Yeah.
wasn't gonna do it, and then I did it. I feel like I'm not making a choice. I feel like it's just happening to me. And that may be a
Yeah.
little dramatic for some people, but that's where it can get to. I mean, I think the other thing is if you have one and then you struggle to stop, like you think you're gonna have one, but then, you get that feeling, your discernment is gone. Like you're just like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, whatever, who cares? And then you find yourself doing that again and again. And honestly, I have to tell you, like, if you're drinking to the point where you do have a hangover, like, that's not a good sign. And I understand the older we get, sometimes hangovers come, not
Right.
as, it takes a lot less than it used to. But at the same time, like a hangover, think about a hangover is that is your body literally rejecting this poison. That is your body saying, don't do this to me. And if your body is telling you that, like, that's not a faith thing. That's just like God made our bodies to recognize when something is bad for them. And so I think those are a couple of things. But even if it's just on your mind where you feel like you have this, this dependence that you don't like. I remember reading a book one time from a Christian author a few years ago where she said, some of you are going to think this is totally stupid, but every Wednesday night would have this martini at this thing that I did with my girlfriends. And I started to look forward to that like it was my escape. And I felt very convicted that God didn't want me to do that anymore. Now, that may sound like too much or like she's overthinking it, but for her, that was a heart issue for her. That's what God was speaking to her. And we have to be open to what God is telling us as individuals. Not everything is permissible, but not everything is good either. And so, how can we open ourselves up to what that discernment of the Holy Spirit is? What are we not willing to lay down? I think that's the other thing. What are you not willing to surrender? And that'll tell you what
Yeah,
you're
for
hooked on.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. And there have been many things throughout my life that have fit in that category, and it's like, so then you recognize it, right? Okay. And then what's the next step, you know? It's like you recognize it and then what? What do we do after that?
Yeah, if you're recognizing it, I think you start to I think one of the things you got to do is like think about what could it mean and go all the way to the quote the worst thing it can mean on both directions. Like the worst thing it can mean is this is going to get worse and I'm going to become dependent and maybe I do get addicted and it becomes this bad thing for me and my family. On the other side, maybe you have to quit drinking and you never drink again. Those are the two extremes. I think once
Right.
we imagine those two extremes, that gives us like permission to kind of start exploring the middle of those things. But really, for me, and what I recommend to everyone is to just start being curious about it. Start educating yourself about alcohol, what it does to the body, what is your history with it. I mean, honestly, that's the way the book is written is exactly for that because I've got like assessments and prompts and history checks and all these things to
It's
where you can,
awesome.
yes, to where you can just kind of be like safely exploring this issue in your life, or not even call it an issue, but just this substance and what it means to you as a person. And the idea is not to get to the end of it and be like, well, I'm never drinking again. That's not the point. And if you make that the point, you may be scared away and never do the things. But the point is to get more information. And when you have more information, you actually make different choices based on that information, shockingly. And so I really just say to people
Yes.
for this book, by the end of this book, you'll never think about alcohol in the same way again. I mean, are you willing to do that? And once you're willing to do that and you learn a little bit, and this is how it was for me, you know new things and you can't unknow them, and you can't make
Right.
the same decisions when you have this new information. Not that that means you'll get sober, but it will mean that you have like almost like informed consent about the things that you're doing. I saw a clip on
Mm.
another podcast I did today that I totally forgot I had said this, but I think it's a really good point. So let me quote
Do
which
it.
was, if people were sitting in a bar drinking and all the statistics about what alcohol does to the body and how it destroys families and what it's done throughout history were scrolling through on the wall, would they keep drinking? And I was like, it'd be pretty hard to keep them in there. Because when
Mm.
you think everybody knows somebody who has been affected by alcoholism. Everybody knows a family that's been destroyed by generational addiction. And so it's like we need to be very careful in dealing with this. It's not a benign substance. It's something that has the power to kill, and it's something that Satan uses to destroy families and to distract us from the mission of God in the world. So it is something to take seriously in our lives.
I mean, I absolutely agree with you. Why do you think these gray areas are so difficult for Christians? Why is it so hard? Maybe this one in particular. Why is it a gray area that's so hard for Christians to recognize and name? And even like beyond that, like even what does that tell us about gray areas in general? Because this isn't the only one. And it's like,
Right.
how do we, I guess maybe even like what kind of principles are you learning about investigating gray areas
Yeah.
within moral reasoning within our culture about this? I can repeat those questions. I know they're kind of,
Well, no,
but
I mean, I think it does. I think it does require a little critical thinking. And I have this great quote in the book from John Piper. I'm not going to quote it directly, but basically what it says is, someone asked him, "Is it a sin to drink?" And he said, "Well, is it a sin to drink water?" And he said, "My answer to both questions is the same. It might be, and here's why. It's because if you're drinking water instead of giving it to your neighbor who needs it more than you, then yeah, it's sinful. And, if you're drinking water and you're taking away from a child, and being selfish, then it's a sin. And so when it comes to alcohol and so many other things, like, no, it's not a black and white thing, but it is a moral thing. It is a thing that you have to actually make a choice about. It's not something that you can just passively consume and assume that it's always going to be okay. It does require us to have intentionality behind it. And I think most of us have just gone along with it without thinking much about it. It's at every event, it's at every wedding, every concert, vacation. It's just there integrated and layered into our lives. And we're told it's just fun. Well, everything's funner. But at the same time, like, it has so much more layered meaning than that. And I think as Christians, we have to recognize that. Like, it is not, as I said, it is not just this benign thing. It's not, Sprite. Even Sprite, has we could talk sugar addiction. That's a whole
yeah, I
nother.
mean, it's like how many benign things are there? But I get what you're saying. I mean, benign, yeah, but alcohol is in no way benign. I agree.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, and we have to
it's
as
powerful. It's like fire. You know what I mean? It's like, is
it
fire
is.
benign? No.
Right, exactly, and how many times do people do things that they wouldn't otherwise do? I mean, listen, domestic violence, 85% of the time, alcohol is involved. Same thing with,
Sure, it's a big thing with murder and
yeah,
some.
crime as well, drugs and alcohol almost always. So it's like, imagine if all of a sudden all of these things disappeared from the world, how many things would be better? And so think about, like, if you're partaking in that, like, that is a weighted decision that you should have a little bit of education about before just going for it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So you talk about freedom and you emphasize freedom, which I think is super important to centralize the idea of freedom. Again, bring to us, why did you want to focus on freely, on freedom? why did you want to make sure that freedom was the center as opposed to something like, I mean, obviously we want people to be, break free of chains, but it's not like, right, the freedom doesn't seem to me to be the freedom of like I'm free from this, which is a part of it, right? It's
Yeah.
built into that meaning, but it's more like this is a I'm approaching it almost from the
Yes.
lens of freedom.
Right. Actually,
So
yeah,
what does that, yeah,
both
go ahead.
ways. When I titled the book, I was doing so based on the reasoning you said. Although someone yesterday at my book launch party was like, "Oh, I thought you meant it like you're free," and I was like, "Well, that too. Actually, it's like a double meaning." But the reason I did is because that's the only thing that works for me. I had tried, a very hardcore black and white thought process, and that didn't work. And, I have gotten a little bit of pushback occasionally from people that say, well, some people can't freely choose. Some people are ruining their lives and destroying their families and they have to quit. And I understand that there are people in that situation and I hope they can quit if that's the case. But for many people, that pressurized kind of thought process and environment is going to lead them away from doing it. It's almost like, when I'm trying to think of another, like a comparison here, but like when you're forced to do something, it's like you don't want to do it. But when you get to choose it, it's different, right? And so that's
Yes.
kind of how it was for me. I started diving into some more like secular resources. I say this in almost every interview. I read the book This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, and it spoke to me so much because it was the opposite of
Hmm.
pressure. It was like, hey, if you want to drink while reading this book, that's fine. Just keep reading. And she even did this experiment in the book, which I'm not going to recommend, but I thought it was so fascinating. In the course of writing the book, she did an experiment. She hadn't been drinking. She said, "I think I'm going to record myself. I'm going to get drunk and I'm going to record myself and I'm going to like take notes and do this as like a data exercise." And she did. And sort of the outcome was sort of like, well, that was kind of stupid, right? But like but the fact that she was like, I'm doing this from a not from the perspective of I have to, but like I'm learning about alcohol and my body and like why I do things and all, just this sort of curiosity perspective was so fascinating to me. And I was like, well, I'm gonna approach it that way too. Looking at things, I already said this, but like it's like looking at everything as a piece of data and information instead of like judging your moral character for the whole of your life. Like that takes the pressure off and it makes you able to see things clearly. And I think for me and many Christians, like I spent so many years being like, you don't have enough self-discipline, you don't have enough willpower, you don't love God enough, you're not a
That's
strong
right.
enough Christian, you're a hypocrite. I mean, so
That's
much
right.
shame just that I put on myself and Satan as well would throwing that at me. But when I was able to change my mindset on it and be like, wait a second, like number one, alcohol is an addictive substance that once you start putting it into your body, like your body does crave more of it and that's not your fault. And you didn't really know that's how it worked. So there's one layer of like sort of fault taken off. Not that you don't take responsibility for your actions, but there's a lot more to this than people realize. And once you
Hmm.
start to peel back the layers, you can address them one by one and you can start to be like, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, now I'm empowered to make a different choice based on that new information. So that's what I wanted to write this book, to give people that permission and to just feel safe exploring, feel safe being like, yeah, I think I do, like, I don't know, I have this issue with alcohol, to where it doesn't have to be shameful to admit you feel like you're struggling with it. Like it doesn't have to be like this
Right.
big thing that you admit to everybody and like then you're shamed. It's just like, yeah, I'm struggling with this. Just like people like, yeah, I'm struggling with overeating.
Yeah.
Struggling with drinking. A lot of people do. It's very normal. Let's normalize people being allowed to talk about it so it doesn't get locked in this dark room where it grows and grows and grows because it has, no light. Light kills the shame. So if we bring it out into the open, it's much less likely to have a multiplied growth.
I just keep coming back to this idea. I love that. I just keep coming back to this idea. Like, let me back up. I love the idea of data and information, treating it like that as neutral, essentially, right? Instead of bringing in all these morally weighted ideas and thoughts. And because I've been in that exact place, shame has never helped me quit anything.
Right.
And it just hasn't. I felt a whole lot of it. And it hasn't really ever helped me. It doesn't seem like, and maybe maybe that's a certain kind of shame, right? There's a destructive shame and maybe a productive shame. I don't know, but
Girl.
you
Totally.
know, Yeah, conviction. And I kind of even mean like even more like a socially certain things are not accepted. And that's probably good, right? That there's
Yeah,
a certain
right,
level of
yeah.
shows for shame for really bad things
For
that
sure,
people
yeah.
might do, right? So, but when it comes to this issue, it's like grace and forgiveness, piece of this is so important that this is happening before we get to the place of shame and condemnation and self condemnation. And this is such a hard thing for people to talk about in church. We've been going back and forth with that. And I just want to press even more into like, let's keep thinking about why this is such an issue. Why do we have to hide so much? Why do we have to like, what is it? Because most people are struggling with something, right? That they hear, like say someone stands up and they admit that they drink or whatever, and they have a problem or whatever it is. Most people maybe they even have that problem. Maybe they're worse than them and they don't think they have a problem. This person thinks they have a problem because they feel like it's becoming an issue. But this other person who's been drinking way more and they don't think they have a problem, but they could even judge someone who says they do. You have this sense that people like, we don't feel everyone in the crowd, if you're sitting there and you're confessing something, I just have this image in my mind, I guess, because I'm a pastor of that. But like everyone in the crowd would have something that's
Yeah,
going on, most
yeah,
likely.
yeah. I mean, I
Worse and better. Go ahead.
well, one of my calls in this message is we need more people to go first. Like, not everyone has that ability, that inner ability, but some people do. I do. And I was like, I want more people to go first. I want more people standing up in front of the church and going first. And I have this memory, and I wrote about this in my second book, Reason to Return, about the church, but I have this memory growing up in my church where every so often my pastor would just, he was supposed to preach, but like God kind of prompted him to say, you know what, we're doing one of those days where you come to the mic if you have something to say. And people will just come up there and confess stuff, like in the middle of it. Like we are so used to in this community hearing the overcomer testimonies and
Yes.
stories after the fact. And the people are healed and God saved them. But it's like, what about the people that are still in the middle of it? How can we make it okay
Yes.
for them to come out and talk? That at my church, that was such a great example of that. I loved that so much. And then I have another memory of being at an event one time where a girl was sharing. This was at a Christian women's event, and she was like in the middle of her divorce. Like it was like not even, it was not going well. And yet she was sharing how God was working through her life. And I was like, that's interesting because most of the time people are not sharing in the middle of the mess? And yet, what
Yes.
if more people did share in the middle of the mess and then other people could come alongside them and be like, wow, I had no idea. And I get that a lot. I had no idea. Although at this point I am 5 years sober, when I first began sharing about it, I was really, really in the beginning stages. And that has given other people permission to kind of move forward too. Like I get messages all the time that are like, I just got a year sober and you were such an inspiration to me. And, thank you. And I'm like, I had no idea. You have no idea who your story is affecting.
Mm,
And so not being afraid to go first and to be like, I'm dealing with this. And that's how the church should be. I mean, that's how AA is. You get in there, these recovery
yes.
meetings, people are just like, whoa, here's what happened to me. Here's what I did. Here's what I feel like I can't keep going. It's like, that should not be reserved for a recovery meeting. That should be like Sunday morning. We're talking about these things. And so the more people do it and go first, the more people will feel like they're allowed to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely hear what you're saying. And you need like someone who's a pioneer, someone who's going to bring out and essentially is going to face the uncertainty of how people are going to react. Because there's like, so on the one side, like I imagine that people are relieved, right? That finally someone is saying it. And then the other side, you probably have people that are like, they're giving permission for people to do sinful things. Not giving permission, not saying that, meaning they're like and I think this is false thinking, by the way.
Yeah.
It's not good thinking. It's that they've gone down, like they've taken a couple steps, and now where's it going to go? It's the snowball effect, that kind of like slippery slope argument. And I think that the fear that we have, it's the fear that man, if we start talking about this or we start letting people or we start just accepting it, then this is all going to be acceptable behavior within the church.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that is the right view. I'm trying to think even out loud as to why are people afraid of talking about it? Not only afraid of talking about it like I don't want to be exposed, but why are people afraid of allowing people to talk about it on the other side? Like, is it going to create something? Well, I think it would be the same kind of, and you don't have to comment on this unless you want to, but it'd be the same kind of thing with an LGBTQ, right? With someone in the community, and they're coming and they're talking about it, and they're talking about it openly or whatever it is, and it's just people are just thankful for them. I don't know if that's a good
Well, no, I
example, but it's
had that thought as well, because I think that issue is another really hard one where it's like, well, how does the church kind of walk through that?
yes,
But I would have the same response, which is just that if it is someone that is desiring to please God and follow scripture and they're trying and failing, and we're just being there to sort of lift them up and help them walk more closely with God in their struggle, then I hope that they can be honest. And the same thing with the drinking. And, it just made me think like, if you don't have these sort of open forums, not forums, but like, the ability for people to be honest, like it's just happening outside of the church anyway. It's happening
yes,
silently beneath the surface, whether or not you want it to happen. So why not the church get engaged in the conversation and so they can be an integral part of people's lives? I mean, we are missing so much discipleship in the church these days. And so many people are just seeing church as like, this is what I do on Sunday morning. And I know you've probably heard that so many times, but the church needs to get into the mucky nitty gritty of people's lives. If not, like,
absolutely,
why is the church there? It's not doing anything if we're just showing up surface level for 2 hours on a Sunday morning and then going home. Like, you have to get in the middle of this. And, that's one reason I love my church. I go to a really small church, and, we know what's going on in each other's lives. And I think if you go to a church and you don't feel like that's the case, something is wrong, something's missing. Not saying your church is bad, but like, how are you not participating? And really assess, like, is it a healthy church?
right. Yeah, is this a place that I can actually bring these areas of my life to people that care about me, will pray for me? And I think where the thing happens is like people struggle with accountability and how to be accountable and give accountability. And I don't know if you have any insights from just your work in this area of how that's done well, because, and let me just explain what I mean, maybe a little bit more like people it's been my observation that in my experience, people can really struggle with holding someone accountable, right? To like, how do I actually hold them accountable? Say someone's like, I'm struggling with this, and then they just keep doing it. And then I even think about in leadership, right? Because I'm a leader. I drank when I was in leadership. So I think about leadership, right? Like, what does a leader do? What does a church leader do when they're struggling with this? Is it automatically they have to leave? Is it automatically have to do something? Like, what's going on? And I don't know if you've kind of worked through that accountability issue, because like this is freedom, and it's great when you can let someone just, go at their own pace. But have you experienced things where that wasn't going to work for someone to go
Well,
at their own pace?
I certainly think leadership is probably in its own category. And I don't know so much about that side of things, because I know there's going to be definitely different rules for that. In terms of the average churchgoer, I mean, I think number one, they have to be like, I want to be held accountable. They have to kind of sign up for that. And then, if you personally are having sort of like a relationship with this person, like a friendship, and they are hoping for accountability, you might have to set up some kind of informal like, do you want me to check in? Like, honestly, like, you can't force them, of course. And so they have to be like, yeah, will you? But if you are not sort of setting up, rules for this, I think what you would do as the person that sort of like, say it was me talking to someone at my church that was struggling, it'd just be sort of like me praying for them, checking in, asking how they're doing, giving them an opportunity to share, and certainly not shaming them if they mess up. I mean, again, you bring the shame in, it's not going to work. So just like having a lot of grace and knowing that if someone is still continuing to be faithful in their desire to change and do better, like that may be the best that they can do right now. And you just have to support and encourage them the best that you can, knowing that there are people that are going to live their whole lives and never fully overcome this. Um, that's okay. That doesn't mean that they're not, I mean, it's not okay. We don't want that. But at the same time, understanding that like nothing is going to be fully perfect and attained until we all get to heaven. And so for some people, that's going to be a lifelong battle. And so you kind of have to weigh it, I think, by the individual situation in terms of how you offer support and what they're open to.
Yeah, I would definitely say you'd have to do it on a case by case situation. What I've found with accountability is it just doesn't work so much of the time. And
Well,
what
I
I
think
mean
in
is
a
just like,
discipleship style relationship where there's trust built up and
yeah, yeah, I think, and I'm not saying that we don't influence each other for the good. We definitely do. But the accountability where it's like someone is standing in power over this other person
you have to
and
do it
or
for
you're going to
you.
confess your sins. Like again, that just people aren't going to do it. They're going to lie about it. If they don't feel safe, they're not going to tell the truth about it. If they feel like if they tell the truth, something unpleasant is going to happen to them, even relationally, they're just going to stop. They're just going to stop telling it or they're going to stop
Well,
participating.
and I think the other thing
That's
that
been my experience.
with a substance type of issue, it's like, well, the only goal here is not like just we're not drinking. What are the other goals in
Yeah.
relation? What are the goals in your relationship with God, in your spiritual life, in your family? What are these other things that you're attaining and changing in this whole process? Because again, it's not just about the drinking, it's about so many other
Yes.
things. And so if you can have like accountability or not accountability, but just like where you're saying, oh, there's transformation here, there's transformation here. It's not all hinging on whether or not you're perfect in terms of whether or not you drink. So you have to make it about something much more holistic, which it is.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. So if someone has like they're listening to this and they're really intrigued by what's going on and they're like, "Yeah, I want to start." Obviously you want them to get the book, but what would you say what are their next steps? What would you tell them to do?
I would say good job on listening to this whole episode if you're here.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's the first step, and just, don't panic. There's nothing that you have to do right now other than I would say just, like, opening your heart and mind to what's possible. I would say your first step is saying a quick prayer like, "Hey, God, I'm hearing this. I'm feeling this little bit of a nudge, and just, like, lead me." Like, that's can be the short prayer. And I think you gotta really lead with prayer knowing that, like, the Holy Spirit is walking with you. I don't just say this because I wrote the book, but I really do think the book is a great first step simply because it is written for that
Oh
person.
yeah.
It is truly written for the person that is like just this topic speaks to them and they're just interested in learning more. I mean, it's partially my story, a little bit of journalism, getting into the backstory of the Bible and how alcohol was used then up to present day, but it's also just very practical in terms of the questions that it asks you to think about and the prompts and the sort of feelings that it brings up. I really recommend people kind of have a notebook or a Google Doc, or even I'm personally a fan of, I write in all my books and I underline. And so I would hope that you would do that because I do think that the practicality of the book means that if you get through it by the end of it, you really are going to be like, wow, I never thought about it that way, or I learned something new. And you will be empowered to like do something differently. And if you're like me, that means you read all the sobriety memoirs that are out there, which there are so many. I
Mm.
love them all. Most of them are secular, but these days there's so many great resources online. There's so many positive influence to go alcohol free, both religious and not religious. And so the amount of people and the amount of reasons that you may have to continue on the journey of educating yourself and seeing what's next will be endless. It's not like it was even 10 years ago. Things have changed. And there's a lot of people out there that want to cheer you on.
I really love that. How can people, is there a preferred vendor? Obviously, people can buy the book on Amazon. We all know that. Is
Yes.
there a preferred vendor that you have, and how can they connect with you and your work and get involved?
Yeah, Amazon is great, mostly because it just like it's easier for us to track what's going on. But honestly, Christian book often has it for a little bit of a lower price if you're looking for that, or you're wanting to buy in bulk, like if you want to do it for a book club or something like that, like Christian book may be better. So either one, IBP, it's really wherever books are sold. So if you have a preferred place to buy them, do it. Check for sales. Sometimes they randomly go on sale, which is interesting. And then there is an audiobook too. So if you're into
That's
audiobooks,
great.
that we've got that. But otherwise, for me, I would love to connect with you. I do have a weekly email that I send out. It's everything from tips and tricks to videos that I occasionally do. Sometimes I do like pop up live trainings and classes. like actually starting tomorrow. I know this will be too late by the time this airs, but I do things like the 7-day clarity challenge. So it's 7 days
Mm,
of emails and scripture and action items. And so I do things like that pretty frequently that are usually free, low pressure, all of that. So if you ever are looking for a little bit of encouragement and sort of help walking along with this, you got it. And you can find me at erickaandersen.com. If you see my name, that's how you spell it. It's a little weird. And then Ericka_Andersen on Instagram as well.
very cool. And just so I'll just read it out loud since we may be on for anyone listening, Ericka, Ericka Andersen,
Yes. And
Andersen.
one more thing, I forgot to mention this, and I know I'm
Yeah,
giving you a lot of
please.
information, but I do have a sort of sober, curious guide for Christian women where I've listed some like podcasts and resources that I
Nice.
think are my number. So you can get that at sobrietycurious.com.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Ericka, for spending some time with me and our audience and giving us your insights. It's been really a great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, guys, thanks for joining again. You're a rock star because you've lasted to this point. So thank you for doing that. Share this with someone who you think needs it. We're going to put all of the links into the description for Ericka's books and her website. And until next time, guys, take care and God bless.